Hey guys! Tonight, we begin a story about two women who never met face to face, yet their rivalry defined an entire era. Imagine being born into royalty, only to discover that your own cousin, your blood, wants you dead. One would become the most powerful queen England ever knew. The other would lose her head on the executioner's block, with her cousin's signature on the death warrant. They were family, they were queens, and they absolutely could not both survive. This is the story of Elizabeth and Mary, two baby girls born into a world that didn't want either of them. Yet somehow, they would fight over the same throne for nearly 30 years. So before we dive deep into this incredible true story, I'd love it if you could hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. But only if you're genuinely enjoying what we're exploring together. Hey, I'm curious. Where in the world are you watching this from right now? Are you tucked in bed in California? Sitting by a window in London? Maybe you're halfway across the globe where it's morning, not night. Drop a comment and let me know. I love hearing from you. Now, dim those lights, get comfortable, maybe grab a blanket, and let's travel back to the 1500s together. September 7th, 1533. Greenwich Palace, England. A baby girl is born, and almost immediately, disappointment fills the room. King Henry VIII had been so certain this child would be a son. He'd already planned the celebrations, the tournaments, the grand announcements. But instead, he got Elizabeth a daughter. The wrong gender entirely. Henry barely acknowledged her. See, this wasn't just any baby. This was an Allen's child, and Anne had promised Henry a son. That was the whole reason he'd broken with the Catholic Church, divorced his first wife, and turned England upside down. All for a son. And now, a girl. But here's where it gets darker. Little Elizabeth was only 2 years and 8 months old when her mother, Anne Boleyn, was arrested, accused of treason and adultery, and executed, beheaded. Can you imagine? One day you have a mother, the next day she's gone, and nobody will speak her name again. Elizabeth would grow up never really knowing if her mother was guilty or innocent, never getting to grieve properly, because in the Tudor court showing emotion was showing weakness, and weakness could get you killed. Now, fast forward 9 years. December 8th, 1542, Linlithgow Palace, Scotland. Another baby girl enters the world, but this time, the circumstances are completely different. This baby is Mary Stuart, and unlike Elizabeth, she's wanted. She's treasured. But here's the tragic twist. Her father, King James V of Scotland, dies when Mary is just 6 days old. 6 days. She hadn't even properly opened her eyes yet, and suddenly, she's Queen of Scotland. A queen in diapers. A monarch who can't even hold her own head up. Two baby girls, two queens, born 9 years apart into two completely different worlds. But connected by one crucial detail, they were cousins, family, and that family connection. That's what would eventually destroy one of them. Let's talk about their childhoods, because honestly, it's like comparing fire and ice. Elizabeth grew up in what I can only describe as a masterclass in survival. After her mother's execution, she was declared illegitimate, basically stripped of her princess title. She went from being second in line to the throne to being nobody. Just the king's bastard daughter, the unwanted one. She was shuffled between different households, never quite sure where she stood, watching her father marry 4 more times. 4 more wives after her mother, and some of them, they were nice to her, like Catherine Howard, Henry's 5th wife, who was actually kind to young Elizabeth. But then, Elizabeth had to watch Catherine get arrested and executed, too, when she was just 9 years old. Another woman she cared about, gone, beheaded. Do you see the pattern here? Elizabeth was learning a brutal lesson. Attachment is dangerous. Love makes you vulnerable. Trust can get you killed. At 9 years old, according to historical accounts, Elizabeth reportedly vowed she would never marry. Think about that. 9 years old, and she's already building walls around her heart that would last her entire life. Meanwhile, across the sea in France, little Mary Stuart was living a completely different story. At 5 years old, she was sent to the French court, and let me tell you, this was like sending a child to live in a fairy tale castle. The French royal court was the most sophisticated, glamorous, cultured place in all of Europe. Mary was betrothed to the French prince Francis. Political alliance, sure, but they were children growing up together. She was educated in music, dance, poetry, languages. She learned to be charming, graceful, everything a queen should be. She wore beautiful gowns, attended glittering parties, and was adored by everyone. She was the favorite, the special one. While Elizabeth was learning to hide her emotions and watch her back, Mary was learning to shine, to trust, to believe in romance and happy endings. One girl was being trained for survival in a snake pit. The other was being prepared for a life of luxury and admiration. And here is the psychological insight that I find absolutely fascinating. Both of these childhoods were setting these women up for their futures, and ultimately for their collision. Elizabeth's traumatic childhood taught her to be calculating, suspicious, strategic. She learned to play the long game. She understood that in politics, you show people what they want to see, not what you actually feel. She became a master manipulator, and I mean that in the best possible way. She had to be. But Mary's privileged, protected childhood taught her something completely different. It taught her that she deserved love, that people would help her, that her royal status would protect her. She learned to trust her heart, to believe in loyalty, to think that being legitimate and royal was enough. She never developed Elizabeth's armor. She never learned to hide. Now let's talk about the family tree that connects them, because this is crucial to understanding everything that comes next. Henry VIII, Elizabeth's father, had an older sister named Margaret Tudor. Margaret married King James IV of Scotland, and their son was James V, Mary's father. So if you're following the bloodline, Mary was Henry VIII's great niece. She was Elizabeth's cousin once removed. But here's the really important part. In the eyes of many Catholics across Europe, Mary actually had a stronger claim to the English throne than Elizabeth. Why? Because Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, was Henry's second wife. But the Catholic Church never recognized Henry's divorce from his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. So, in Catholic eyes, Henry and Anne's marriage was invalid, which meant Elizabeth was illegitimate, a bastard, not a true heir, but Mary. Mary's lineage was unquestioned, solid, legitimate. She was descended from Henry VII's older sister. And in those days, legitimacy was everything. Your bloodline was your power. Your birth certificate was basically your resume for ruling a country. So here we have a kingdom, a throne, and two women with a claim to it. One, the sitting ruler's daughter, branded illegitimate by half of Europe. The other, a foreign queen with a perfect, undeniable royal bloodline. Stage was set, the players were in position, and the battle for the crown of England had already begun, years before either of them even wore it. Imagine two baby girls, born into royalty. One, Elizabeth, is brilliant, tough as nails, but technically illegitimate. The other, Mary, is beautiful, charming, and has an unquestionable royal bloodline. But she's naive about the brutal reality of power. Both are destined to be queens in a world that fundamentally believed women shouldn't rule at all. There was this Scottish preacher, John Knox, who literally wrote a book called The First Blast of the Trumpet Against the Monstrous Regiment of Women. Monstrous regiment meant the rule of women, said it was against God's will for a woman to have authority over a man. That a ruling woman was a monster in nature. Both Elizabeth and Mary had to fight this attitude every single day. But they fought in completely opposite ways. Elizabeth fought by becoming more ruthless than the men around her. She never married, never gave any man power over her. She was so sharp, so clever, so politically brilliant that they couldn't deny her capability. She weaponized her femininity, playing up the virgin queen image, while ruling with an iron fist. Mary fought by trying to prove she could be both a queen and a traditional woman. She married multiple times, believing in love, in partnership, in the idea that the right man could help her rule. She wanted it all: power and romance, crown and family. And spoiler alert, this approach would ultimately destroy her. But in their childhoods, neither of them knew this yet. Elizabeth was just trying to survive each day without ending up like her mother, Anne Boleyn. Mary was a little girl being doted on in the French court, completely unaware that back in England, her cousin was learning lessons that would one day make her the most formidable queen Europe had ever seen. And here's what keeps me up at night thinking about this story. What if their childhoods had been reversed? What if Elizabeth had been raised in luxury and love? What if Mary had been the one forced to survive in a dangerous court? Would their fates have been different? Would the survivor have become the romantic, and the romantic the survivor? At the end of the day, they were both just little girls, who didn't ask to be born into this impossible situation. Neither of them chose to be queens. Neither wanted to be enemies. But history, family, religion, and the brutal politics of the 16th century would force them into roles they never auditioned for. One would die old and powerful, the Virgin Queen, arguably one of the greatest monarchs in English history. The other would die at 44 on her knees, under an executioner's axe, a tragic figure who bet on love and lost everything. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Right now, they're still children. Elizabeth is learning Latin and Greek, teaching herself to trust no one. Mary is learning to dance and charm, believing the world is fundamentally good. Neither knows that in just a few years their paths will collide in a rivalry so intense, so personal, so devastating that it would captivate Europe for decades and echo through history for centuries. Before they could become enemies, they first had to become queens. And the education they received, formal and informal, intentional and accidental, would determine not just how they ruled, but how they fought. One learned to survive, one learned to shine. And in the brutal world of 16th century politics, only one of those skills would be enough. So, here's where we'll pick up next. The education of queens. How do you prepare a woman to rule in a world that believes women shouldn't rule at all? Elizabeth and Mary found two very different answers to that question. Those answers would set the stage for everything that follows: the letters, the plots, the betrayals, and ultimately, that cold February morning when one cousin would sign the death warrant for another. Stay with me. This story is just beginning, and trust me, you won't believe where it goes next. So, we've established that these two little girls had wildly different childhoods, but childhood is one thing. Education is something else entirely. And in the 16th century, how you were educated determined not just what you knew, but whether you survived. For Elizabeth and Mary, their education became their weapons. One would wield knowledge like a sword, the other would wield charm like a shield. And spoiler alert, in the brutal Game of Thrones they were about to play, only one of those weapons would be sharp enough. Let me tell you something that absolutely blows my mind. Elizabeth Tudor could speak 6 languages fluently by the time she was 16. 6. We're talking English, Latin, Greek, French, Italian, and Spanish. At 16, I could barely handle my Spanish class. And she's over here having philosophical debates in ancient Greek. But here's the thing. This wasn't just about being impressive at dinner parties. For Elizabeth, languages were survival tools. Her tutor, Roger Ascham, later wrote about her. Her mind has no womanly weakness. Her perseverance is equal to that of a man. Now, that sounds sexist as hell to our modern ears, right? But in the 1550s, that was literally the highest compliment you could give a woman. Ascham was saying, she thinks like a man. She's smart enough to actually matter. And Elizabeth knew this was her ticket to relevance. She couldn't inherit the throne on beauty alone. She'd been declared illegitimate, remember? Needed to prove she was more capable than any man who might challenge her. So, young Elizabeth studied obsessively. While other noble girls were learning needlework and how to run a household, Elizabeth was translating works by ancient philosophers. She'd wake up at dawn and study until her candles burned out. Latin grammar, Greek poetry, theology, history, political philosophy. She was building armor made of intelligence. Because she learned something crucial from watching her father's court in a world where men hold all the power. The only way for a woman to survive is to be smarter than every single one of them. Here's a specific example that shows her genius. When she was just 13, Elizabeth translated an entire religious text from French into English as a New Year's gift for her stepmother, Catherine Parr. A 13-year-old translating complex theological arguments, producing a bound manuscript in her own handwriting. But it wasn't just showing off, it was strategic. She was demonstrating to the adults around her, I'm valuable. I'm educated. I'm worth keeping alive. Every letter she wrote, every conversation she had was calculated. She learned to speak in riddles when she needed to say yes while meaning no, to promise everything while committing to nothing. She studied her father's reign and learned what worked, and more importantly, what got people killed. She became a master of what we'd call today reading the room. She could walk into a court full of men who wanted her dead and walk out with them eating from her hand. That's not luck. It's education, weaponized. Now, flip over to Mary in France. It's a different continent, different curriculum, completely different vibe. Mary Stuart was being educated too, but for a totally different purpose. She was learning to be the perfect Renaissance queen, which in the 16th century meant being beautiful, cultured, graceful, and charming. But we're not just talking about battles and crowns. We're going to uncover how the education each woman received set them on a collision course from the very beginning. Let's start with Mary. Sent to the glittering French court as a child, she was groomed for a very specific role, to be the perfect queen consort of France. And oh boy, did she excel. Mary learned to play the lute beautifully. She could dance better than almost anyone, and she spoke French more fluently than her native Scots. She wrote poetry, understood fashion, and mastered the art of conversation, how to make powerful men feel important, how to laugh at their jokes, how to be memorable in all the right ways. Don't mistake this for shallowness. Mary was genuinely intelligent. She could converse about literature, music, and art. But here's the crucial difference. While Mary was educated to attract men, her cousin Elizabeth was educated to outthink them. Mary learned grace and persuasion. Elizabeth learned strategy and manipulation. One was trained to be the prize in the Game of Thrones. The other was trained to be a player. Can you see the problem brewing? Have you ever been taught skills for one situation, only to find yourself in a completely different one? That's exactly what happened to Mary. She was prepared for the sophisticated French court, where queens were beautiful ornaments. But she was destined to rule. Scotland are rough, violent. It's a religiously divided country where survival required ruthlessness, not poetry. It's like training for a ballet recital and then being thrown into a cage match. You might be technically skilled, but you're in the wrong arena. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the angry Scottish preacher screaming about monstrous women, John Knox. This guy was a Protestant reformer who genuinely believed that women ruling nations was against God's divine plan. In 1558, he published a book titled The First Blast of the Trumpet Against the Monstrous Regimen of Women. An actual quote from it says that to promote a woman to rule is repugnant to nature, an insult to God, the thing most contrary to his revealed will. Translation: women ruling anything is unnatural and just plain wrong. He literally argued that women were too weak, too emotional, and too irrational to govern. And this wasn't some fringe opinion. It was mainstream thinking. Most educated men in Europe believed this. Quoting everyone from Aristotle to the Bible, women were seen as fundamentally unstable, ruled by their emotions, too hysterical to make rational decisions, and too gentle to wage war. Both Elizabeth and Mary had to rule in the shadow of this belief, but they handled it in completely opposite ways. And this is where their education really shows. Elizabeth's strategy was basically, fine, you think women are weak? Watch me be stronger than any king you've ever seen. She cultivated the virgin queen image, portraying herself as pure and devoted only to England. But behind that image, she was absolutely ruthless. She learned to execute her enemies without flinching and play foreign powers against each other. She used her femininity as a weapon, flirting with ambassadors to get what she wanted, but never giving them power over her. There's this famous speech she gave to her troops at Tilbury in 1588, with the Spanish Armada approaching. She said, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." Brilliant, right? She acknowledged their prejudice, but then flipped it. "Yes, I'm a woman, but I'm more courageous than any of you." She beat them at their own game by playing by their rules while secretly breaking every single one. Mary's approach was different. She tried to prove that a woman could be both feminine and powerful, that you didn't have to choose. She married 3 times because she believed that's what queens did. They married powerful men, produced heirs, and ruled in partnership. She tried to be what a Renaissance queen was supposed to be: beautiful, pious, maternal, but also strong. And you know what? In a fair world, her approach might have worked. But the world wasn't fair. Every time Mary showed emotion, it was used against her. When she cried and she had plenty to cry about, it was proof that women were too emotional to rule. When she fell in love, it was proof that women were ruled by passion, not reason. Elizabeth could afford to be cold and calculating because she deliberately removed herself from the traditional female role. Mary couldn't, because she was trying to be both queen and woman. Let me give you a concrete example. When Elizabeth became queen, Parliament was full of men demanding she marry and produce an heir. They saw her as a temporary placeholder. What did Elizabeth do? She gave a speech, held up her coronation ring, and declared, "I am already bound unto a husband, which is the kingdom of England." Mic drop. She used the romantic language they understood, but weaponized it to make herself untouchable. When Mary faced similar pressure, she actually did get married, multiple times. And she didn't just make political matches. She fell in love, choosing with her heart. Every single time, it was a disaster. We'll get into those disasters later, but here's the point. Elizabeth was educated to see marriage as a political tool. Mary was educated to see it as a duty and a source of happiness. Same pressure, completely different responses, all stemming from their different educations. What I find fascinating is that you can see these differences in the letters they wrote to each other, many of which still exist. Elizabeth's letters are masterpieces of diplomatic doublespeak. She'd write things like, "Dear Sister Queen, though we grieve to hear of your troubles, we must counsel caution and virtue above all else." It sounds supportive, but she's actually saying nothing. She's expressing sympathy without promising help, giving advice without taking a side. It's brilliant and infuriating. Mary's letters, on the other hand, are emotional and direct. After her second husband was murdered under suspicious circumstances, she wrote to Elizabeth, "I am so upset I can neither write nor think." She's raw, she's honest, and she's asking for understanding. Elizabeth probably read that and thought, amateur move. Never show weakness, because Elizabeth had learned a brutal lesson that Mary was about to discover in the Game of Thrones. Vulnerability is a fatal flaw. Their stories are a powerful lesson in how the expectations placed upon us can shape our destinies. Who was right? Mary, who learned that vulnerability creates connection, or Elizabeth, who believed that intellect and strategy were the only keys to survival? That's the tragic question, isn't it? In a better world, Mary's approach, an emotional, human, would have been valued. But in the brutal political landscape of the 16th century, Elizabeth's armor of intellect and strategic thinking was what kept you alive. Here's the common mistake people make when they look at these two queens. They assume Elizabeth was smart and Mary was stupid. That's not true at all. Mary was intelligent, educated, and cultured, but she was educated for the wrong war. She brought a violin to a knife fight. She was trained to win hearts, but she needed to break them. She was taught that being a good queen meant being beloved. Elizabeth learned that being a powerful queen meant being feared. And both of them, every single day, had to deal with men like John Knox telling them they had no right to exist as rulers at all. Can you imagine that level of pressure? Waking up every day knowing that half of Europe thinks you're an abomination against nature just because of your gender. Both women internalized that pressure, but it pushed them in opposite directions. Elizabeth became more masculine in her rulerships, strategic, unemotional, dominant. Mary tried to prove femininity and power weren't contradictory, caring, emotional, collaborative. The lesson here isn't that one approach was right and the other was wrong. The lesson is that the same challenge can produce radically different solutions depending on how you're prepared for it. Elizabeth's harsh childhood prepared her for a harsh reign. Mary's sheltered childhood left her vulnerable to harsh realities. Neither of them asked for this. Neither of them wanted to be enemies. But their education set them on collision courses they couldn't avoid. Because here's what's coming next. 1558, the year that changes everything. The year Elizabeth becomes Queen of England. The year Mary, already Queen of Scotland, marries the French prince and becomes Queen of France too. The year their rivalry stops being theoretical and becomes deadly real. Because in 1558, Mary makes one decision, one bold political claim that Elizabeth will never, ever forgive. Two queens, educated in completely different ways, are about to come face to face with their destiny. One has learned to be a fox, the other has learned to be a peacock. The game they're about to play. It requires foxes. Let's see what happens when Mary's beauty and Elizabeth's brilliance finally collide. Picture this. November 17th, 1558. A cold, gray morning in England. Queen Mary Tudorese. There was another Mary before asterisk or asterisk Mary. This one's Elizabeth's half-sister dies at the age of 42. The moment she takes her last breath, everything changes, drawled Elizabeth Tudor. The girl who'd spent her entire life one wrong move away from the executioner's block is suddenly Queen of England. And across the English Channel in France, 16-year-old Mary, Queen of Scots, hears this news and thinks, wait, that throne should be mine. Now before you pick sides, let me tell you why 1558 wasn't just another year. It was the year that turned two cousins into mortal enemies. Because what happened next wasn't just political maneuvering, it was personal. It was a wound that would never heal, and it all started with something that sounds almost ridiculous to us now: a coat of arms. When Elizabeth becomes queen, she doesn't waste time. She gets her coronation planned, she's assembling her council, she's making it crystal clear. I am the legitimate Queen of England, chosen by God, recognized by Parliament, and if anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with my executioners. She's 25 years old, but she is not playing around. This is the moment she's been preparing for her entire life. Every language she learned, every political lesson she absorbed, every time she bit her tongue and survived. It was all for this. But here's where it gets messy. Mary, Queen of Scots, is also having a pretty spectacular year. She's already Queen of Scotland, right? Has been since she was 6 days old. And in April 1558, 7 months before Elizabeth becomes queen, Mary marries Francis, the Dauphin of France, the heir to the French throne. So she's not just Queen of Scotland anymore. She's about to be Queen of France too. That's 2 countries, 2 crowns. Pretty impressive for a 16-year-old. But Mary's father-in-law, King Henry II of France, decides 2 crowns aren't enough. He looks at the situation and thinks, you know what? My daughter-in-law has a better claim to England than Elizabeth does. Let's just declare her Queen of England too, and that is exactly what he does. It's the moment Elizabeth's half-sister Mary dies. Before Elizabeth is even crowned, Henry II proclaims his son Francis and daughter-in-law Mary as King and Queen of England, Ireland, and France. Now, did they actually control England? No. Was Elizabeth literally sitting on the throne in London? Yes, but in Henry's mind, and in the minds of Catholic Europe, this was legitimate. Because remember, the Catholic Church never recognized Henry VIII's marriage to Anne Boleyn. In their eyes, Elizabeth was illegitimate, a bastard. And Mary, with her perfect Tudor bloodline through Henry VIII's older sister Margaret, was the rightful heir. Here's where the heraldry comes in. And I know what you're thinking. Who cares about fancy family crests? But trust me, in the 16th century, heraldry was everything. It was like your Instagram verification check, your LinkedIn profile, and your birth certificate all rolled into one. Symbols on your coat of arms announced to the world exactly who you were and what you claimed to own. So, Mary starts displaying the royal arms of England, the 3 gold lions on a red background, quartered with the arms of Scotland and France. She is literally announcing to all of Europe, I am Queen of Scotland, France, *, and * England. Her dishes had these arms engraved on them. Her furniture, her official seals. Everywhere you looked, there was Mary Stuart claiming Elizabeth's throne. And not quietly, not subtly, loudly and publicly, with all the ceremony and symbolism that European royalty could muster. Can you imagine how Elizabeth felt? You finally made it. You survived your mother's execution, your sister's persecution, years of walking a tightrope between life and death. We're finally queen. And your 16-year-old cousin, safe in her French palace, is telling everyone who will listen that, actually, she's the real Queen of England. You're just the illegitimate placeholder. If someone did that to you, if a family member publicly claimed that your job, your position, your entire identity was rightfully theirs, how would you feel? Would you ever forgive them? Would you ever trust them? This is the moment Elizabeth's feelings toward Mary hardened into something that would never soften. But here's the fascinating complexity. Mary's claim wasn't crazy. Legally, from a Catholic perspective, she actually did have a stronger claim. Henry VIII's older sister, Margaret Tudor, married the King of Scotland. Mary was their great-granddaughter. In terms of pure bloodline, not considering Henry's own declarations that Elizabeth was his heir, Mary was ahead. This wasn't just teenage ambition. It was a genuine, calculated political move, backed by the power of France and the authority of the Catholic Church. And for Elizabeth, it was a declaration of war. Let's talk about 2 queens, 1 throne, and a rivalry that would define an era. On one side, you have Mary, Queen of Scots. Her claim to the English throne? Arguably superior. She was unquestionably legitimate. Her parents' marriage was recognized by everyone, and her royal blood was undiluted. On the other side, Elizabeth I, her claim was based on her father's will and an act of Parliament. But her mother's marriage to Henry VIII? Controversial. Her legitimacy? Questionable, depending on who you asked. So, in a purely legalistic, blood rights sense, Mary had a very strong case. But politics isn't about what's legal or right. It's about what's possible. What was possible was this. Elizabeth was sitting in London with an army, a treasury, and the support of Protestant England. Mary was in France with a theoretical claim and no real way to enforce it. Elizabeth had possession. Mary had a pedigree. In the brutal reality of 16th century power politics, possession beats pedigree. Every single time. This brings us to the first major strategic mistake made by Mary's father-in-law, King Henry II of France, a mistake that a young Mary went right along with. He picked a fight with a woman who had spent her entire life learning how to win. Elizabeth wasn't some pampered princess who would buckle under pressure. She was a survivor who had turned survival into an art form. When Henry II declared Mary the true Queen of England, he didn't intimidate Elizabeth. He made her an enemy. He gave her a target. And Elizabeth was very, very good at eliminating targets. The letters that start flying between the two queens around this time are absolutely fascinating. They call each other sister queen and dear cousin, but underneath all that courtly language, there's a tension you could cut with a knife. Elizabeth writes to Mary in this very measured, diplomatic way, saying, "We understand that you have recently displayed certain arms which belong to us. We trust this was an oversight and will be corrected." It's so polite, so calm. But the subtext is crystal clear. Stop claiming my throne, or there will be consequences. How does Mary reply? With this strange mix of deference and defiance, she essentially says, "My dear father-in-law, the King of France, made this decision, and as an obedient daughter, I can't question him." She's passing the buck, hiding behind his authority. But she's also not taking the arms down. The English lions stay quartered on her coat of arms with those of Scotland and France, the claim remains. And this is where their different upbringings really start to show. Elizabeth sees this as a chess move that requires a counter-move. Mary, on the other hand, seems to see it as just family politics, courtly ceremony, something she can smooth over with kind words and sisterly affection. She doesn't seem to grasp that she's just made an enemy for life. Or maybe she does, but her position in France is just too comfortable to risk offending her powerful father-in-law by backing down. There's this tragic quality to watching it unfold. You just want to grab Mary and say, "Do you not understand what you've done? This woman will never forgive you. Never. She'll be pleasant to your face, but she is marking you as a threat." And Elizabeth eliminates threats, but Mary is only 16, surrounded by powerful men telling her what to do. She probably genuinely believes that this is just how royal politics works. You make claims, you negotiate, you write polite letters, and eventually everyone figures it out. But Elizabeth isn't playing that game. Elizabeth is playing the long game, the survival game. It's a game where you smile at your enemies while you're plotting their destruction. And from 1558 onward, Mary is her enemy. Then, in July 1559, from Mary's perspective, her situation gets even better. King Henry II dies in a gruesome jousting accident. A splinter from a lance goes right through his eye and into his brain. It's a random, horrific death. And suddenly, Mary's 15-year-old husband, Francis, becomes King Francis II of France. At just 16 years old, Mary is now Queen of Scotland and Queen of France. Two of the most powerful countries in Europe. Only Spain and England can rival her combined power. From Paris, this looks amazing for Mary. She is at the absolute pinnacle of royal success. But from London, this looks terrifying to Elizabeth. Her rival, the woman actively claiming her throne, now controls France, England's traditional enemy. This is nightmare fuel for Elizabeth. Mary's theoretical claim is suddenly a very real and present danger. But then, history is full of these cruel twists. In December 1560, just 18 months after becoming king, Francis II dies. He was sickly his whole life, and it was likely an ear infection that spread to his brain. Mary is now just 18 years old, and suddenly, she's a widow, no longer Queen of France. She needs to leave, go back to Scotland, that rough, unfamiliar country she barely remembers. And here's the thing. When Francis died, Mary could have done something incredibly smart. She could have written to Elizabeth and said, "Look, that whole claiming your throne thing, that was my father-in-law's idea. I was 16. Sorry. Can we please start over?" A genuine apology, a real olive branch, might have changed everything. Elizabeth was practical. If Mary had renounced her claim to England and acknowledged Elizabeth as the rightful queen, they might have actually become allies. At the very least, Elizabeth might have helped Mary later on when she desperately needed it. Whether it's pride, bad advice, or a genuine belief in her superior claim, she never apologizes. She never backs down. The English arms stay in her heraldry. The claim remains, even if it's now a quiet one. And when she's forced to return to Scotland in 1561, that unresolved tension travels with her. This is the mistake that neither of them could ever fix. It's the original sin of their relationship. Mary claimed something that wasn't hers to claim, ... Or was it? Depends on your perspective. Elizabeth refused to forgive an insult to her legitimacy, ... Or was it a genuine threat? Again, it depends on your perspective. You have two women, two valid viewpoints, and zero room for compromise. Have you ever had a relationship where one moment, one decision, one sentence just poisoned everything that came after? Where no matter how much time passes, you can never quite get past that initial hurt? That's what 1558 did to Elizabeth and Mary. It set a pattern that would repeat for the next 3 decades. Mary doing things that seemed reasonable to her, Elizabeth seeing those same things as direct threats. Neither woman was able to bridge the gap because the foundation of their relationship was cracked from the very start. And the cruelest irony of all, they never met. Not once. For 30 years, sent ambassadors, negotiated, threatened, and ultimately destroyed each other. They never once stood in the same room. All of this drama, all of this tragedy, played out between two women who only knew each other through letters, rumors, and political machinations. So now, we're in 1561. Elizabeth is the established Queen of England. 3 years into her reign, growing more confident and more powerful every day. And Mary is returning to Scotland, a country she barely knows, speaking a language she's rusty in. A Catholic trying to rule over Protestant lords, with no husband and no clear path forward. The stage is set for one of history's greatest tragedies. Both were unmarried, both faced immense pressure to produce an heir. And both knew that just across the border their cousin sat on a throne nursing a grudge that would never die. The stage was set, the battle lines were drawn, and what came next was one of the most compelling contrasts in history. How did two queens facing the exact same problem, the exact same pressure, the exact same question, choose completely opposite answers? The question was simple: should a queen marry? Elizabeth's answer would shock Europe. Mary's answer would destroy her. Let's talk about love, power, and the catastrophic difference between them. There was this one question that haunted both Elizabeth and Mary from the moment they became queens. Who will you marry? Notice it wasn't if. It was who. Because in the 16th century, an unmarried queen was almost unthinkable. Queens were supposed to marry kings or powerful nobles, produce heirs, and let their husbands handle the messy business of ruling. A woman ruling alone was seen as temporary at best and dangerous at worst. Parliament, advisors, foreign ambassadors, everyone expected both women to marry, and quickly. But this is where these two cousins diverged so dramatically that their choices would literally determine whether they lived or died. Elizabeth turned the question of marriage into the most brilliant political weapon of her entire reign. Mary, on the other hand, turned it into her greatest vulnerability. Same pressure, same question, two answers that couldn't have been more different. And honestly, both strategies made perfect sense, till only one of them worked. Let's start with Elizabeth, because her approach was pure genius level manipulation. From the moment she became queen, the marriage proposals started flooding in. King Philip II of Spain, her dead half-sister's widower, yet awkward, proposed. Multiple French princes were interested. Swedish royalty sent emissaries. Every eligible nobleman in Europe saw an opportunity. And Elizabeth's response? She essentially said yes to all of them. Well, not yes exactly, more like, maybe. Let's talk about it. I'm very interested. Send more ambassadors. She strung them along for years, for decades actually. She'd flirt with Spanish ambassadors while secretly negotiating with the French. She'd act like she was seriously considering marriage to one prince, while entertaining proposals from another. The brilliant part was that each suitor thought he had a real chance. Each country stayed friendly with England because they believed their prince might become King of England. Elizabeth kept everyone guessing, everyone hoping, and everyone invested in keeping her alive and in power. It was a master class in diplomacy. There's this famous moment in 1563 when Parliament basically begs her to marry. They were terrified. She'd been seriously ill with smallpox and nearly died, and England had no heir. If Elizabeth died unmarried, the succession crisis could tear the country apart. So, Parliament sends a delegation, and Elizabeth gives them this incredible response. She tells them she's perfectly content to live and die a virgin. If that happens, she wants her tombstone to say, "Here lies Elizabeth, who lived and died a virgin." Now, was she actually a virgin? It's been debated for 450 years. Did she have secret relationships? Maybe. There are endless theories about Robert Dudley, her favorite courtier, the man she genuinely seemed to love. But here's what matters. She controlled the narrative, married to her king, married to her kingdom, England. She made her unmarried status a part of her mystique, her power, her brand. She turned what should have been a weakness, no husband, no male protector, into her greatest strength. Because here's what Elizabeth understood that Mary didn't. The moment you marry, you give someone else power over you. In the 16th century, when a woman married legally, everything she owned became her husband's property. Her money, her lands, her decisions all transferred to her husband. Now imagine that on a national scale. If Elizabeth marries, does her husband become king? Does he get to make decisions about English policy? Does he control the army, the treasury? Where does the Queen's power end and the King's power begin? Elizabeth looked at that situation and said, absolutely not. Oh, well. By staying unmarried, she kept absolute control. No man could claim authority over her. No foreign power could control England through a royal marriage. She was the sole ruler, answerable to no one. And she maintained that position for 45 years. But this came at a huge personal cost. Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, was the love of her life, or at least as close as Elizabeth allowed herself to get. They had known each other since childhood. He was handsome, charming, intelligent, and genuinely devoted to her. The chemistry between them was obvious to everyone at court. Ambassadors wrote reports about how much time they spent together, how she'd touch his hand, how they danced. But Elizabeth couldn't marry him. First, because he was already married, though his wife died under very suspicious circumstances in 1560, falling down a flight of stairs and breaking her neck. Some people whispered that Dudley had murdered her to free himself for Elizabeth. Second, even if he was free, marrying her favorite courtier brought no political advantage. No foreign alliance, no military support, no strategic benefit. It would just be for love. And Elizabeth had learned that love was a luxury queens couldn't afford. So, she kept him close, but unmarried, for decades. He eventually married someone else, and she was reportedly furious. But what could she say? She'd refused him. He had waited years for her. At some point, he needed an heir. The tragedy of Elizabeth's choice is that she got power, security, and independence, but she gave up intimacy, family, and the possibility of personal happiness. Now, let's flip the coin and look at Mary, whose approach was the complete opposite. When Mary returns to Scotland in 1561, she's 19 years old, widowed. And everyone's telling her the same thing. Marry again, and soon. Scotland needs a king. You need an heir. But Mary had a desire that Elizabeth had suppressed. She wanted love. She genuinely believed she could have both political stability and romantic happiness. She believed in the fairy tale. First, she played it smart. She asked Elizabeth's advice about potential husbands. She wrote these letters saying, essentially, "Dear cousin, who should I marry? I want to please you." And Elizabeth, in classic Elizabeth fashion, suggests Robert Dudley, her own favorite, the man she's been flirting with for years. She offers to send him to Scotland to marry Mary. Can you see what she's doing? It's It's brilliant and cruel at the same time. If Mary marries Dudley, Elizabeth gets a spy in the Scottish court, someone loyal to her, reporting back and potentially controlling Mary. If Mary refuses, Elizabeth can claim Mary was unreasonable and ungrateful. It's a win-win for Elizabeth. And Mary, bless her heart, actually considers it. She's trying so hard to please her cousin, to mend the relationship that had been damaged by that old heraldry scandal. But this was just the beginning of a series of decisions that would lead Mary down a path of ruin, while Elizabeth's careful strategy secured her legacy. Have you ever made a decision based on your heart, only to have it blow up in your face? Well, for Mary, Queen of Scots, it literally did. After returning to Scotland, Mary meets Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, in early 1565, and she falls head over heels. I mean, can you blame her? Darnley was over 6 feet tall, which was like being a giant back then. He was blonde, handsome, and could charm the birds from the trees. He wrote poetry, he danced, he played music. Plus, he had his own claim to the English throne through his grandmother, Margaret Tudor. On paper, he was the perfect package deal, a British match uniting Scottish and English interests, and Mary was genuinely smitten. They got married just a few months later, on July 29, 1565, and across the border, Queen Elizabeth was absolutely livid. First, Mary had married without her permission, a big no-no if she wanted to keep her spot in the English line of succession. But more importantly, she'd married someone else with Tudor blood. 2 claimants, now 1 couple. Any child they had would have an incredibly strong claim to the English throne. Elizabeth saw this as a direct challenge, and honestly, she wasn't wrong. But this is where Mary's fairy tale romance begins to unravel. Darnley, the charming poet, was also vain, immature, entitled, and increasingly violent. Within months, Mary realized she had made a catastrophic mistake. Darnley wasn't content being the queen's husband. He demanded to be called king. He wanted real power. But Mary, who actually knew how to govern, refused to hand over authority he hadn't earned. And when he didn't get his way, he turned nasty. Enter David Rizzio. Rizzio was Mary's private secretary from Italy. He was a talented musician, a trusted confidant. They'd often work late into the night, discussing politics, handling correspondence, and playing music. By all historical accounts, their relationship was completely platonic. But Darnley, consumed by jealousy and paranoia, convinced himself they were having an affair. His suspicion, combined with a conspiracy by Protestant lords who despised Mary's Catholic faith, created a ticking time bomb. The bomb exploded on the night of March 9, 1566, at Holyrood Palace in Edinburgh. Imagine this. Mary, 6 months pregnant, is having a quiet dinner in her private chambers with Rizzio and a few ladies in waiting. Suddenly, Darnley bursts in, followed by a gang of armed conspirators. They grab Rizzio, who clings to Mary's dress, screaming for his life. Mary, the queen, commands them to stop, begs them to let him go. But her own husband, Darnley, physically restrains her, holding back his pregnant wife as his men drag her friend from the room. They stab Rizzio over 50 times, murdering him right outside her chamber, making sure she hears every horrifying second. Can you even comprehend the trauma of that moment? Being held by your husband while your friend is brutally killed just feet away. This is what happened when Mary chose love over political strategy. She married the man who seemed perfect but turned out to be a monster. When news reached Queen Elizabeth, she wrote a letter to Mary. On the surface, it was sympathetic. Dear sister, we're shocked by your troubles, but you can just feel the subtext, can't you? Elizabeth was probably thinking, this is why you don't marry for love. This is what happens when you let a man into your bed in your throne room. And the contrast is just staggering. On the same night Mary was being terrorized by her husband, Elizabeth was in London, unmarried, unattached, and in absolute control, hosting ambassadors and masterfully playing the game of diplomacy. One queen chose safety and power. The other chose love and partnership. One slept alone, but ruled alone. The other had a husband who had just proven he was willing to terrorize her to get what he wanted. The question isn't which choice was right, but which one helped you survive in the brutal world of the 16th century. And in that arena, Elizabeth's cold calculation was proving far more effective than Mary's warm heart. Mary had wanted what seemed natural: love, family, a partner. Elizabeth wanted what seemed impossible: absolute power as a woman, with no strings attached. Mary's natural choice was destroying her, while Elizabeth's impossible choice was turning her into a legend. Both strategies came at a cost. Elizabeth gave up personal intimacy for political survival. Mary risked her political survival for personal intimacy. Neither should have had to make that choice, but they did. And only one of them would live to die of old age. But we are not done with Lord Darnley yet. The Rizzio murder was just the beginning of Mary's nightmare. Because what happens next, the explosion, the mystery. The scandal would turn Mary from a queen into a suspect, from a ruler into a prisoner, and set in motion the events that would eventually lead to her own cousin signing her death warrant. After the murder of David Rizzio, Mary's marriage to Darnley was dead. Legally, they were still husband and wife, and she was still carrying his child, but any love or trust was gone forever. On June 19, 1566, Mary gave birth to their son, the future King James VI of Scotland, who would one day unite the thrones as James I of England. But even this joyful moment was tainted. Darnley, the father of the heir, barely bothered to show up. He couldn't even be bothered to properly acknowledge his own son. Mary was trapped. Trapped in a marriage with a man she now loathed, surrounded by scheming lords who blamed her for the kingdom's chaos, trying to rule an increasingly unstable country. And then, on the cold, dark morning of February 10, 1567, everything changed. It's around 2 a.m. at a house called Kirko Field, just outside Edinburgh's city walls. Darnley is staying there, supposedly recovering from smallpox or maybe syphilis. Historians still argue about it. He's in a small, separate house, perhaps for quarantine, or perhaps because Mary just couldn't stand the sight of him. The reasons are murky, but what happened next is crystal clear. A massive explosion rips through the night, so powerful it wakes up half of Edinburgh. The house is obliterated, reduced to a pile of rubble. In the garden, searchers find Darnley's body, along with the body of his servant. But here's where the mystery deepens. The bodies aren't burned. They're not crushed by debris. They're just lying there in the orchard, apparently strangled. Darnley is in his nightshirt with no signs of injury from the blast, but very, very dead. So what actually happened? Was he killed before the explosion? Did he hear his attackers coming, try to escape, and get caught in the garden? Was the explosion just a cover-up for a murder, or was the blast meant to kill him, but when it failed, someone finished the job? To this day, it remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. But here's what we do know. Somebody wanted Darnley dead. In fact, a lot of people wanted Darnley dead. He had made enemies everywhere. The Protestant lords hated him. The Catholic lords found him unreliable. Mary herself hated him for the murder of Rizzio and his general awfulness. Half of Scotland had a motive. But in the aftermath of the explosion, all eyes turned to one person, the person who arguably looked the most suspicious of all, Queen Mary herself. Did she orchestrate the murder of her own husband? A single event would derail her reign, tarnish her reputation forever, and force her to flee her own kingdom. The death of Lord Darnley wasn't an end, but the beginning of the end for Mary, Queen of Scots. James Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell, was one of Mary's most loyal supporters. He was a powerful Protestant Scottish lord, fiercely military-minded and utterly devoted to her cause. He had stood by her through the Rizzio crisis, protected her when other lords turned against her, and, crucially, he was at Kirko Field on the night of Darnley's murder. Multiple witnesses placed him near the scene. And here is where Mary makes the decision that will haunt her for the rest of her life. In the immediate aftermath of Darnley's death, she does something incredibly strange. She doesn't seem all that broken up about it. She goes into mourning. He was her husband, the father of her child, and she had to observe the proper forms. But there's no grand display of grief, no public outcry, no immediate demand for justice. She simply retreats to Holyrood Palace, puts on black, and waits. And people notice. The ambassadors notice. The other European courts notice. Elizabeth notices. They're all watching, waiting to see how Mary will respond to her husband's murder. Will she hunt down the killers? Will she seek revenge? But Mary does nothing decisive. She allows a half-hearted investigation. Bothwell is technically put on trial, but it's a complete sham. He's acquitted within hours, with no real evidence presented and no witnesses called. It was essentially, Earl of Bothwell is innocent, case closed. Why? Why would Mary, who should be furious about her husband's murder even, if he was a terrible husband, protect the most obvious suspect? This is the question that destroyed her reputation across Europe. The conclusion everyone jumped to was painfully obvious. Mary was involved. They believed Mary knew about the plot, or maybe even ordered it. She wanted Darnley dead, Bothwell arranged it, and now they were covering it up together. Was it true? We genuinely don't know. Some historians believe Mary was completely innocent, as shocked as anyone. Others argue she knew something was going to happen but didn't stop at a sin of omission rather than commission. Still others are convinced she actively participated in the planning. The evidence is contradictory, the sources are biased, and we're trying to solve a 450-year-old murder mystery with incomplete information. But here's what really matters. Perception became reality. Whether Mary was guilty or not, Europe decided she was. And what she does next makes everything infinitely worse. On April 24, 1567, just 10 weeks after Darnley's death, Mary is traveling from Edinburgh to Stirling Castle. She's intercepted by Bothwell and about 800 of his soldiers. He abducts her hand. I'm putting that in heavy quotes, because historians still debate whether this was a real kidnapping or stage theater. He takes her to Dunbar Castle. They are alone there for several days. Then on May 15, 1567, less than 3 months after her husband's murder, Mary marries Bothwell, the man everyone believes killed her husband. She marries him in a Protestant ceremony, alienating her Catholic supporters. Without asking for anyone's permission, and without waiting for a respectable mourning period, she just ... marries him. Can you imagine the scandal? Europe wasn't just shocked, it was scandalized. This didn't just look like poor judgment, this looked like proof of guilt. If Bothwell murdered Darnley and Mary immediately marries him, the only conclusion is that they were having an affair, plotted the murder together, and were now trying to legitimize their relationship. The optics could not possibly have been worse. But let's consider the alternatives. Maybe Mary really was kidnapped. Maybe Bothwell forced her and she felt she had no choice. By keeping her at Dunbar, he had compromised her reputation. In the 16th century, if an unmarried woman or widow was abducted and spent days alone with a man, her honor was considered destroyed. Marriage was the only way to salvage anything. So maybe Mary married Bothwell, not out of love, but because she felt trapped. Maybe, and this is a harder thought, maybe she did love him. After years of terrible choices in men, after the frail Frances who died, after the monstrous Darnley who terrorized her, maybe Bothwell seemed like someone strong, loyal, and capable. Maybe she convinced herself this could work, that marrying her most powerful supporter would stabilize her rule, that love and politics could finally align. But if that's what she thought, she was catastrophically wrong. The marriage lasts about a month before everything falls apart. Scottish lords rise up in rebellion. They're done with Mary. The Protestant lords, the Catholic lords, everyone unites in opposition. This Bothwell marriage is a bridge too far. They meet Mary's forces at Carberry Hill on June 15, 1567. There's a standoff. No actual battle, just two armies facing each other. The lords give Mary a choice: abandon Bothwell and return to rule, or fight and probably die. Mary chooses to abandon him. Bothwell flees to Denmark, where he'll eventually die in prison, a broken man. And Mary, the lords arrest her, imprison her, and force her to abdicate the throne in favor of her 1-year-old son, James. Mary, Queen of Scots, who had been a queen since she was 6 days old, who ruled Scotland and was briefly Queen of France, who had survived political intrigue, religious warfare, at multiple plots, is deposed, finished. At just 24 years old, her reign is over. And it was all because of the Darnley disaster and the Bothwell scandal. All because she made choices that, to everyone watching, looked like guilt. Whether she was actually guilty of murdering her husband or not, she looked guilty. And in politics, appearance is everything. Elizabeth, watching all of this from England, must have felt vindicated. Every choice Mary made, marrying for love, trusting the wrong men, acting on emotion rather than calculation, seemed to prove Elizabeth's strategy right. Stay unmarried. Never give anyone ammunition to use against you. Elizabeth's cold, controlled approach looked better and better as Mary's warm, impulsive approach destroyed her. But here's the twist that makes this story so compelling. Mary's downfall makes her more sympathetic, not less. Yes, she made terrible decisions. Yes, she trusted the wrong people. But she was also a young woman trying to survive impossible circumstances. She was 24 years old, ruling a hostile country with no real support system, making life-or-death decisions under enormous pressure. Maybe she was guilty of murder, or maybe she was just guilty of bad judgment and worse luck. The mystery of Kirko Field remains unsolved. We'll probably never know exactly what happened that February morning. But what we do know is this. Whatever happened, it destroyed Mary's life. It turned her from a queen into a fugitive. Because after being deposed, after being imprisoned in Scotland, Mary is going to make one final, desperate gamble to salvage her life. She's going to escape Scotland and flee to England. She's going to throw herself on the mercy of her cousin, her rival. The woman whose throne she also claimed, Queen Elizabeth I, in fascinating rivalries, the 19-year imprisonment of Mary, Queen of Scots, by her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. This isn't just a story of politics. It's a profound psychological drama about hope, betrayal, and the crushing weight of captivity. When Mary fled to England in 1568, she expected help from her cousin. Instead, she was met with suspicion and placed under house arrest. Elizabeth's responses were masterpieces of political non-commitment. Phrases like, "We will consider your situation with all due care," really meant we were doing nothing. The promise to meet when circumstances permit was code for never. Elizabeth was sympathetic, to a point, but she wasn't budging. Mary was a prisoner. What's psychologically devastating is that for years, Mary truly believed Elizabeth would change her mind. She held on to this hope that if she just explained herself well enough, if she was patient enough, if she was respectful enough, Elizabeth would see reason and set her free. I think it's like being in a toxic relationship. Constantly believing the other person will finally understand and treat you fairly, but they never do. Mary couldn't accept that this was her permanent reality. And Elizabeth, she was likely conflicted. There's evidence she felt for Mary. They were cousins, both women navigating a man's world. A part of Elizabeth might have wanted to help, but her survival instinct was stronger. Every time she considered releasing Mary, her advisors would remind her, "Mary has a claim to your throne. She is a figurehead for every Catholic who wants you dead. Keep her locked up." And those advisors weren't wrong. While in captivity, Mary became exactly what Elizabeth feared, a symbol. English Catholics who despised Elizabeth's Protestant rule began to see Mary as their rightful queen. Every plot against Elizabeth, whether through uprising, assassination, or invasion, suddenly involved Mary, whether she wanted it or not. Just a year after Mary arrived, the Northern Rebellion erupted in 1569. Catholic nobles rose up, demanding Elizabeth be replaced with Mary. The rebellion was crushed brutally, but it proved Elizabeth's point. Keeping Mary alive was dangerous. Then, in 1570, Pope Pius V issued a papal bull, essentially an official decree excommunicating Elizabeth. It declared her an illegitimate ruler, absolved Catholics of any loyalty to her, and basically gave them permission to overthrow or even kill her. Imagine living with that. Elizabeth was now officially marked for death by the Catholic Church, and Mary was the alternative they were offering. From Elizabeth's perspective, every day Mary lived was a day her own life was in danger. But executing a fellow queen without clear evidence of treason would be politically catastrophic. So, the years dragged on. Mary stayed locked up, Elizabeth stayed on guard, and neither could escape. Mary's health deteriorated in the damp English castles. She developed rheumatism and was in constant pain. The once vibrant queen who charmed the French court became a sedentary figure, spending her days on endless needlework and writing increasingly desperate letters. Her beauty faded. Even her own son James, whom she hadn't seen since he was a baby, was taught in Scotland that his mother was a disgrace. He began corresponding with Elizabeth, not Mary, making it clear he didn't want her back. Her own son had abandoned her. This prolonged imprisonment started to radicalize Mary. As the years passed with no change, she became more desperate, more willing to consider extreme measures. She just wanted her freedom. But now she started to think, maybe the only way out is through Elizabeth's death. Maybe the plots weren't so bad. Maybe an invasion was justified. The Mary who entered England in 1568 was not the same woman in 1585. Desperation changes you. And all this time, Elizabeth's advisors, especially her spy master, Sir Francis Walsingham, were watching. They read every letter, tracked every plot, and waited. They were waiting for Mary to give them what they needed. Clear, undeniable proof that she was plotting against Elizabeth's life. If they could prove she was guilty of treason, * in England, * against Elizabeth specifically, they could execute her. Wouldn't be killing a queen, it would be executing a traitor. That was legal, that was justifiable. But they needed hard evidence, in Mary's own handwriting. The brilliant, ruthless Walsingham was about to engineer a trap so perfect, Mary would walk right into it and seal her own fate. The man we need to talk about is Sir Francis Walsingham. If he'd been born in the 20th century, he would have been running the CIA or MI6. This guy essentially invented modern espionage. He built a spy network that stretched across Europe, employing dozens of agents and double agents. He intercepted thousands of letters, cracked codes, and infiltrated enemy organizations so thoroughly that he probably knew about plots against Elizabeth before the plotters themselves did. His entire operation had one goal: keep Elizabeth alive and destroy Mary, Queen of Scots. He saw Mary as a loaded gun pointed at England, and he was determined to make it misfire in a way that would legally justify her execution. Let me paint you a picture of Walsingham's spy network because it's both impressive and terrifying. Imagine you're a Catholic exile in Paris, thinking about joining a plot against Elizabeth. Confide in a friend who introduces you to a sympathetic English priest. That priest puts you in touch with an agent who claims to have connections in England. You start planning, writing letters, thinking you're being careful. What you don't know is that the sympathetic priest is Walsingham's man. The agent with connections, Walsingham's man. The person delivering your letters, also Walsingham's man. He had infiltrated every level of conspiracy against the Queen, Walsingham's. Challenge was that Mary's communications were heavily monitored. She knew her letters were being read, so she was cautious. She wrote in code and used intermediaries. To trap her, Walsingham needed a communication channel that Mary believed was completely secure. He needed her to feel safe enough to drop her guard and openly discuss treason. This is where Gilbert Gifford comes in. Gifford was a young Catholic man who had been training to be a priest. He seemed like the perfect courier for the conspirators. But at some point, Walsingham's agents turned him. He became a double agent. Gifford approached the French ambassador and offered to set up a secret, foolproof way to smuggle letters to Mary. The method was genius. A local brewer who was also secretly on Walsingham's payroll would deliver beer to Mary's residence at Chartley Hall. He would place a packet of letters inside a waterproof casing, stuff it into the bunghole of a beer barrel, and deliver it. Mary's servants would retrieve the letters, and her replies would be sent back the same way. Mary and her supporters thought they had finally found a secure channel. They were ecstatic. But what they didn't know was that every single letter, going in and out, made a detour. Before reaching Mary, the letters were taken to Walsingham's office in London. There, his master codebreaker, a man named Thomas Phillips, would carefully unseal them, make copies, decipher the code, and then reseal them so perfectly that no one could tell they had been opened. Then, the letters would be sent on their way to Mary. Her replies went through the exact same process in reverse. Walsingham was reading everything. The trap was set. All Walsingham needed was a plot, and one landed right in his lap. It was called the Babington Plot, named after a wealthy young Catholic named Anthony Babington. He and a group of friends, full of romantic ideals and religious fervor, hatched a plan. It had two parts. First, a foreign invasion by Spain to put Mary on the throne. And second, the assassination of Queen Elizabeth. Babington wrote a letter to Mary, smuggled via the beer barrel, detailing the entire plan. He asked for her approval. This was the moment Walsingham had been waiting for. The letter reached Mary. She now had a choice. She could ignore it, she could reject the plot, or she could approve it. After 19 years of imprisonment, after all the false hope and despair, what would she do? On July 17, 1586, Mary wrote her reply. In it, she enthusiastically endorsed the plan for a foreign invasion. Crucially, she also agreed to the part about freeing her, which was directly linked to the assassination of Elizabeth. she had taken the bait. When Walsingham's codebreaker, Philipps, deciphered this letter, he famously drew a small gallows symbol on the copy. He knew what it meant. They had her. With Mary's incriminating letter in hand, Walsingham moved swiftly. Babington and the other conspirators were arrested, tried, and executed in a gruesome public display. Then, in August 1586, Mary's rooms were raided. Her papers were seized, and she was informed she would stand trial for treason. The 19-year waiting game was over. The psychological warfare had become literal. The trap had been sprung, and the desperate queen was caught. Have you ever been stuck in a situation where you just keep hoping things will get better, but they never do? That's the story of Mary, Queen of Scots, for nearly 2 decades. After fleeing to England, she was immediately placed under house arrest by her cousin. Queen Elizabeth I. Mary kept believing Elizabeth would change her mind. For years, she held on to this hope that if she just explained herself well enough, if she was patient enough, Elizabeth would see reason and let her go. It's like being in a toxic relationship where you keep thinking the other person will finally treat you fairly, but they never do. Mary couldn't accept that this was her new reality. And Elizabeth? She was likely conflicted. There's evidence she felt sympathy for Mary. They were cousins, after all, both women trying to survive in a man's world. A part of Elizabeth might have wanted to help, but her survival instinct was stronger. Every time she considered releasing Mary, her advisors would remind her Mary is a threat. Mary has a claim to your throne. Mary is a figurehead for every Catholic who wants you dead. Keep her locked up. And they weren't wrong. While in captivity, Mary became exactly what Elizabeth feared, a symbol. English Catholics who hated Elizabeth's Protestant rule started seeing Mary as their hope. If they could just remove Elizabeth, they could replace her with Mary, the rightful Catholic queen. Every plot against Elizabeth suddenly involved Mary, whether she wanted it or not. Just a year after she arrived, in 1569, the Northern Rebellion broke out. Catholic nobles rose up, demanding Elizabeth be replaced with Mary. The rebellion was crushed brutally, but it proved Elizabeth's point. Keeping Mary alive was dangerous. Then, in 1570, the Pope himself issued a decree that essentially excommunicated Elizabeth, declared her illegitimate, and gave Catholics permission to overthrow her, even kill her. Can you imagine living with that? Elizabeth was now officially marked for death, and Mary was the person they wanted to put in her place. From Elizabeth's perspective, every day Mary lived was a day her own life was in danger. But executing a fellow queen without clear evidence of treason against England would be a political disaster. So, the years dragged on. Mary's health fell apart in the damp, cold English castles. She developed rheumatism and was in constant pain. The woman who once charmed the French court became a sedentary figure, doing endless needlework and writing desperate letters. Even her own son James, whom she hadn't seen since he was a baby, abandoned her. He grew up in Scotland, taught that his mother was a disgrace, and started corresponding with Elizabeth, not Mary. This is what captivity does. It radicalizes you. The longer Mary was imprisoned, the more desperate she became. At first she just wanted to be free. But as years passed, she started thinking maybe the plots against Elizabeth weren't so bad. Maybe an invasion was justified. Desperation makes you consider things you never would have before. And all this time, Elizabeth's spy master, Sir Francis Walsingham, was watching. He was reading every letter, tracking every plot, and just waiting. He was waiting for Mary to give him what he needed. Clear, undeniable proof that she was plotting against Elizabeth's life. If he could prove that, it wouldn't be killing a queen. It would be executing a traitor. That was legal. That was justifiable. But they needed hard evidence. Mary's own words, in her own handwriting, approving a plot to kill Elizabeth. And Walsingham, brilliant and ruthless, was going to engineer a situation where Mary would give him exactly that. He was going to lay a trap so perfect that Mary would walk right into it and seal her own fate. The 19-year waiting game was about to end. The psychological warfare was about to become literal. What comes next involves beer barrels, coded letters, and a spy master who knew exactly how to turn desperation into evidence. To understand how this perfect trap was set, we need to talk about the puppet master himself, Sir Francis Walsingham. If this guy had been born in the 20th century, he would have been running the CIA or MI6. He essentially invented modern espionage. He built a spy network that stretched across Europe, employing dozens of agents and double agents. He intercepted thousands of letters, cracked codes, and infiltrated enemy organizations so thoroughly that he probably knew about plots against Elizabeth before the plotters themselves did. And his entire operation had one goal: keep Elizabeth alive and destroy Mary, Queen of Scots. He saw Mary as a loaded gun pointed at England, and he was determined to make it misfire in a way that would legally justify her execution. Let me paint you a picture of Walsingham's network, because it's both impressive and terrifying. Imagine you're a Catholic exile in Paris thinking about supporting a plot against Elizabeth. You confide in a friend who introduces you to a sympathetic English priest. That priest puts you in touch with an agent who claims to have connections back in England. You start planning, writing letters, thinking you're being careful. What you don't know is that the sympathetic priest is Walsingham's man. The agent with connections? Walsingham's man. The person delivering your secret letters? Also Walsingham's man. He'd infiltrated every level of the Catholic resistance. Walsingham's primary challenge was Mary herself. She was kept in isolation. Her letters in and out were supposed to be monitored. So how could he get her to incriminate herself in a new plot? He needed a secret, secure channel of communication, one that Mary would trust completely. And this is where the genius of his plan comes in. He decided not to stop the flow of information, but to control it. He would create a pipeline for secret letters to and from Mary, a pipeline that he could tap into and read everything. He found a young Catholic nobleman named Gilbert Gifford. Gifford was a double agent, appearing to be a loyal supporter of Mary, but secretly working for Walsingham. The plan was brilliant. Gifford approached the French ambassador, who was Mary's main link to the outside world, and offered to set up a new, safe way to smuggle letters. The method involved hiding the letters in a watertight case, placing that case inside the bung of a beer barrel, having a local brewer deliver the barrel to Mary's residence at Chartley Hall. The brewer, who was also on Walsingham's payroll, would drop off the beer, retrieve the hidden letters, and pass them to Gifford. Now Gifford would then take them to Walsingham's office. There, a team of experts would carefully unseal the letters, make a copy, and then a master forger would reseal them so perfectly that no one could tell they'd have been opened. The letters would then be sent on their way. Mary and her supporters thought they had found a foolproof way to communicate. They were ecstatic. Finally, they could plot freely. They had no idea that Walsingham was reading every single word. This beer barrel post became a trap. Walsingham wasn't just waiting for a plot to happen. He was actively encouraging one. He let the conspirators believe they were succeeding, feeding them misinformation and making them feel confident. All he needed was for a serious assassination plot to emerge, and for Mary to give her explicit blessing to it in writing. And soon, a group of young idealistic Catholics, led by a man named Anthony Babington, walked right into Walsingham's carefully laid web. They were about to give him everything he had been waiting for. Imagine you're the target of a massive conspiracy. The courier delivering your letters. He's working for the enemy. The person receiving them. Same deal. Your entire secret plan is actually a production staged by your greatest rival, and you're the only one who doesn't know. This is the world of Sir Francis Walsingham, Queen Elizabeth I's spy master, and his target was Mary, Queen of Scots. Walsingham built a spy network that was decades ahead of its time. He planted agents in Catholic communities all across Europe. Spain, the Netherlands, even Rome. He recruited people who could travel freely between countries. Some were genuine supporters of Elizabeth. Others were mercenaries working for cash, and some were compromised individuals spying for him simply to stay alive. He ran dozens of these agents at once, each believing they were his only source, each feeding him a piece of a giant puzzle. But the centerpiece of this entire operation was a man named Thomas Phillips. If Walsingham was the director, Phillips was the technical genius. He was a master cryptographer, a codebreaker of phenomenal skill. At an age where secure communication relied on ciphers, substituting symbols for letters, Phillips could crack almost any code. He would study encrypted letters, find the patterns, figure out the system, and decode entire conspiracies. But that's not all. He was also a master forger. He could imitate handwriting so perfectly that even the original writer couldn't tell the difference. Think about that for a second. Walsingham could intercept your secret letter, have Phillips decoded, read all your secrets, forge an addendum in your own handwriting, asking for more details, and then send it on its way. The recipient would never know the letter had been tampered with. And when they replied with that extra information, Walsingham would have even more evidence. It was brilliant, and it was absolutely ruthless. Now, Walsingham didn't just wake up one day and decide to trap Mary. He had been tracking conspiracies against Elizabeth for years. He'd already taken down several major plots involving the Scottish queen. Let's look at two of them, because they show you exactly how this man operated. First, there was the Ridolfi plot in 1571. Roberto Ridolfi, an Italian banker in England, hatched a plan to assassinate Elizabeth, marry Mary to the Duke of Norfolk, one of England's most powerful nobles, and restore Catholicism with Spanish military backing. It was elaborate, well-funded, and involved some serious players. But Walsingham infiltrated it completely. His agents discovered the plot, tracked every participant, and intercepted the letters between the conspirators. The Duke of Norfolk was arrested and executed. Ridolfi escaped, but his network was destroyed. And Mary? They found letters proving she knew about the plot, but it wasn't enough to execute her. She could claim she was just a passive recipient of information, not an active conspirator. Then came the Throckmorton plot in 1583. Francis Throckmorton, a young English Catholic, was coordinating between Mary, Spanish ambassadors, and Catholic exiles in France. The plan involved a Spanish invasion, a Catholic uprising, Elizabeth's assassination, and Mary's placement on the throne. Sound familiar? It was basically the same plan, just with different players. Walsingham tracked this one for months. When they raided Throckmorton's house, they found coded letters, lists of Catholic safe houses, and invasion plans. Under torture, Throckmorton confessed everything. He was executed. The Spanish ambassador was expelled, and again Mary was implicated but not definitively enough. Do you see the pattern? Plot after plot, and Mary is always connected but never quite provably guilty of direct treason. She's always just informed of plans or expressing sympathy with the Catholic cause. She and her advisors were careful. She never explicitly wrote, "Yes, please murder my cousin Elizabeth so I can take her throne." Without that smoking gun, Elizabeth couldn't execute her without looking like a tyrant. But Walsingham knew it was only a matter of time. Mary was getting desperate. By 1585, she'd been imprisoned for 17 years. She was in her early 40s, her health was failing, her own son had essentially disowned her, and she was running out of hope. And Walsingham knew that desperate people make mistakes. He was a patient man. He could wait. So, he created the perfect conditions for that mistake. In late 1585, Mary was moved to Chartley Manor. Her new jailer was Sir Amias Paulet, a rigid Puritan who hated Catholics and treated Mary with barely disguised contempt. This was a deliberate choice. Mary's previous jailers had been somewhat sympathetic, treating her with the respect due to royalty. Paulet treated her like a common prisoner. He cut off her access to the outside world. No more letters, no more news from France or Scotland. Mary was completely isolated. This isolation was strategic. Because when you cut someone off completely and then suddenly offer them a lifeline, they'll grab it without asking if it's a trap. And that's exactly what Walsingham was counting on. Enter Gilbert Giffard. This guy is one of history's great double agents. A young English Catholic training to be a priest in France, he came back to England and was immediately arrested by Walsingham. Giffard had a choice: work for Walsingham as a double agent or face execution for treason. He chose survival. Walsingham sent him to the French embassy in London, where Mary's supporters were desperate to re-establish contact. Giffard told them he'd found a way. A local brewer delivered ale to Chartley Manor in large barrels. What if they hid letters inside waterproof pouches, tucked into the hollow bung of the barrel? The letters go in, the barrel is delivered, Mary's servants retrieve them, and voila. For outgoing mail, just reverse the process. It seemed perfect, secret, untraceable. Except the brewer was working for Walsingham. Giffard was working for Walsingham. And every single letter going in or out of those beer barrels went straight to Walsingham and his codebreaker, Philippe's. They would open it, decode it, copy it, reseal it, and then send it along. Mary thought she had finally re-established a secure line to the outside world. She had no idea that every word she wrote was being read by the very people trying to destroy her. This is entrapment in its purest form. Walsingham cut Mary off from all legitimate communication and then provided her with what seemed like a secret channel, knowing she would use it. He had given her enough rope to hang herself. Now he just had to wait for her to tie the noose. And into this carefully constructed trap, walked Anthony Babington. He was 25 years old, handsome, wealthy, Catholic, and hopelessly romantic about Mary's cause. As a teenager, he had been a page in the household of one of Mary's earlier jailers. He'd seen her, been charmed by her, and developed a chivalric devotion to her cause. He was exactly the kind of young, passionate idealist who could be manipulated. He was eager to be a hero, to rescue his captive queen. Walsingham had his pawn, and Mary had her final, fatal correspondent. The stage was set for the Babington plot, the final act in the tragic drama of Mary, Queen of Scots. This intricate web of spies, codes, and deception shows just how far one man would go to protect his queen and country. He's connected with a Jesuit priest, John Ballard, who's been touring Europe, trying to stir up support for a plot against Queen Elizabeth. Ballard convinces Babington that the time is finally right. Catholic Spain is poised to invade, and English Catholics are ready to rise up. All they need is for someone to assassinate Elizabeth. Then Mary, Queen of Scots, can be rescued from her long imprisonment and placed on the English throne. To Babington, it sounds glorious, a righteous blow for the true faith against a heretic queen. And so, he commits. He starts planning. He recruits 6 of his friends, all young Catholic gentlemen willing to die for their cause, to be the actual assassins. But there's one crucial thing he needs: Mary's approval. He wants her blessing. He needs to know that when he strikes down Elizabeth, Mary will support and reward him. So he writes to her. He uses that clever beer barrel method of communication set up by Gilbert Gifford, completely unaware that Gifford is a double agent, and that the beer barrel is actually a direct pipeline to Sir Francis Walsingham's desk. Babington writes a long, detailed letter outlining the entire plot. He specifies the 6 men who will assassinate Elizabeth, a larger force to rescue Mary from her prison at Chartley Castle, and a foreign army to invade and support them. It's all incredibly specific and incredibly damning. At the end, he asks Mary a simple question: "Do you approve?" The letter goes into the beer barrel. Walsingham's men intercept it. Master codebreaker, Thomas Philipse, decodes it within hours. Babington used a cipher, but Philipse cracks it with ease. They make a perfect copy of everything, then reseal the original and send it on its way to Mary at Chartley. Mary receives the letter on July 14, 1586. She reads about this elaborate plot to kill her cousin and make her queen. This is the exact moment Walsingham has been engineering for years. Mary is isolated, she's desperate, and she's just been offered what looks like a real chance at freedom. She's being asked to approve a plot, and if she says yes explicitly, that is treason. Clear, undeniable, executable treason. This isn't just about vague sympathies for the Catholic cause anymore. This is active participation in a plot to assassinate the Queen of England. So what does Mary do? Does she condemn the plot? Does she tell Babington he's being a fool and should abandon this dangerous plan? Or, after 17 long years of captivity, does she see this as her last, desperate chance and give the approval that will seal her fate? The answer, Mary writes, will determine whether she lives or dies. And Walsingham, sitting in London with his network of spies and his codebreaker Philipse, is waiting patiently to read it. The trap is set. The bait has been taken. They just need to see if Mary will spring it. July 17, 1586. 3 days after receiving Babington's letter, Mary sits down to write her response. Can you just imagine what's going through her mind? 17 years a prisoner. 17 years of writing letters that changed nothing. Begging for mercy that never came. Watching her life slip away in a series of drafty English castles. And now, finally, someone is offering action. A real, concrete plan to free her. Young men willing to risk their lives. A foreign army ready to invade. It's everything she's ever hoped for. But there's a catch. The plan requires Elizabeth's death. Not imprisonment. Not dethronement assassination. 6 men with daggers ending the life of her cousin, the Queen of England. And Babington wants her blessing, her approval, her direct involvement. This isn't just about being told what's happening. It's asking her to be complicit in murder. So, Mary writes back. What she writes is, even now, over 400 years later, still debated by historians. Because Mary doesn't write, "Yes, kill Elizabeth." She's far too careful for that. She's always aware that her letters could be intercepted, though she has no idea this one definitely will be. But she also doesn't write, "No, absolutely not. Abandon this plan immediately." Instead, she writes something in between. Something that gives approval without explicitly saying the words. In her letter, Mary outlines the practical considerations for the plot. She stresses that everything must be carefully coordinated. The rescue, she writes, must happen at the same time as the 6 gentlemen complete their task. She doesn't say assassination, just their task. But everyone knows exactly what that means. She emphasizes the need for a real foreign invasion, not just empty promises of troops that never arrive. She wants to be sure she's actually rescued before her jailer discovers what's happened. It's all very practical, very detailed. And here's the crucial part. She never once says, "Don't kill Elizabeth." She never condemns the assassination. She just proceeds as if it's a done deal and focuses on the logistics. When you read her letter, it's clear she's approving the plot. She's participating. She's guilty. But she's trying to maintain just enough plausible deniability that, if the letter were discovered, maybe, just maybe, she could claim she was only cautiously responding to information, not actively plotting. But that plausible deniability was not going to be enough. Not for what was about to happen. The letter goes back into the beer barrel. Mary's servants seal it up, thinking they're so clever with their secret system. The barrel leaves Chartley. But before it gets anywhere near Babington, it lands right back on Walsingham's desk. Philippe's decodes it within hours. By now, he knows Mary's cipher system by heart. He reads her response, and he knows immediately. This is it. This is the smoking gun they have been waiting years to find. Philippe's is so certain this letter is Mary's death sentence that he draws a little symbol on the outside of the decoded copy, a gallows. A tiny stick figure gallows. It's a way of saying, "We've got her. She's done." He sends the copy to Walsingham, complete with the gallows mark. And the original encrypted letter continues on its way to Babington. But Walsingham isn't satisfied with just Mary's approval. He wants the names of all the conspirators. Who are these 6 assassins? Who else is involved? He needs to round up the entire network, not just the ringleaders. So he does something audacious. He has Philippe's forge a postscript to Mary's letter. In her handwriting, using her cipher, Philippe's adds a few lines that say, essentially, "By the way, please send me the names of the 6 gentlemen who will undertake this service." He asks for the names of the assassins. The forged letter reaches Babington. He reads Mary's genuine approval, and he's ecstatic. Then he reads her forged request for names. He doesn't know it's a fake. Like the trusting, naive idealist he is, he writes back with all the details, names, locations, plans, everything. He's so thrilled to have Mary's support that he doesn't stop to question why she's suddenly asking for specific details she doesn't really need. He just hands Francis Walsingham his entire conspiracy network on a silver platter. The trap had not just been sprung. It had been completely devoured. And now there would be no more delays. No more legal ambiguity for Elizabeth. There would only be evidence, a trial, and an execution. Walsingham's men move fast. August 1586, the arrests begin. Babington and his co-conspirators are rounded up. Some try to flee, but Walsingham's network is just too thorough. Babington is captured, and at first he plays innocent. But then they show him the decoded letters. They show him Mary's response. They show him his own detailed plans. There's no denying it. He confesses everything, naming everyone involved. The trial is swift. Babington and 13 others are convicted of treason, their sentence: hanging, drawing, and quartering. This means you're hanged until you're almost dead, cut down while still alive, disemboweled while conscious, and finally, chopped into pieces. It's designed to be as painful and humiliating as possible. On September 20th, the first 7 conspirators are executed. Babington goes first. Witnesses say the executioners carry out the full, horrific sentence. The men die screaming. The crowd is so disturbed by the gruesomeness that Queen Elizabeth herself is reportedly troubled. The next day she orders the remaining 7 to be hanged until they are fully dead before the rest of the sentence is carried out. A small mercy in a sea of brutality. These men died for Mary, young, idealistic Catholics, who genuinely believed they were fighting for the true faith and a wronged queen. Were they guilty of treason? Absolutely. Did they deserve that level of suffering? That's a question we still debate. But their deaths proved how serious this plot was. These weren't just talkers. They were men ready to kill a queen. And now, Walsingham turns his attention to his real target, Mary. Mary has been moved from Chartley to Fothering Castle in Northamptonshire. It's more secure, harder to escape from. And in October 1586, her trial begins. By modern standards, this trial is a sham. Mary is denied a lawyer. She's not allowed to see the evidence against her beforehand. She can't call witnesses. She stands alone in a room of 46 English lords and bishops who have, for the most part, already decided she's guilty. This is theater, not justice. It's a formality to give Elizabeth the legal cover she needs. Mary's defense is actually quite clever. She argues that as a foreign queen, she isn't subject to English law. How can she commit treason against a country she doesn't belong to? She admits she wanted to be free and who wouldn't after 19 years of captivity, but she flatly denies plotting to kill Elizabeth. She claims the letters were forged or taken out of context or that Walsingham entrapped her. Honestly, she has a point. Walsingham engineered this entire situation. He created the secret channel for communication that he controlled, basically setting a trap for her to incriminate herself. Today, a good lawyer would argue entrapment. But this is 1586. The concept doesn't really exist yet, and the court doesn't care. They read portions of her letters aloud Babington's. Her reply, the damning details. Mary keeps denying it, but her own words are enough. The court convicts her of treason. But convicting Mary is one thing. Actually executing an anointed queen? It's a terrifying precedent. Elizabeth has spent nearly 2 decades keeping Mary alive for this very reason. Now, Parliament and the public are demanding Mary's death. The threat is real. The evidence is clear. But Elizabeth hesitates. For months, she agonizes over the decision. She signs the death warrant, then changes her mind. She tells her advisors to wait. She even writes to Mary's son James in Scotland. His response is cold but pragmatic. Basically, do what you need to do. Just don't mess up my claim to the English throne. He barely remembers his mother, and his future depends on staying on Elizabeth's good side. Elizabeth tries to find another way out. She asks Mary's jailer, Ammias Paulet, if he'd be willing to quietly kill Mary, make it look like an accident. Paulet, a rigid Puritan who despises Mary, refuses. He won't commit murder. If Elizabeth wants Mary dead, she has to do it legally and publicly. So, on February 1st, 1587, Elizabeth finally signs the death warrant, her signature on the document that will end her cousin's life. But even then, she tells her advisors, don't rush this. She's clearly hoping for more time, another chance to change her mind. But her counsel is done waiting. William Cecil, her closest advisor, and the rest of the Privy Council make a secret, momentous decision. They will execute Mary immediately, before Elizabeth can back out again. They believe, probably correctly, that if they don't act now, this cycle of plots and indecision will continue until one of them succeeds. They send the warrant to Fothering Castle right away, without telling the Queen. On the morning of February 8, 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots, is told she will be executed that day. After 19 years of captivity, her time has finally run out. She has only a few hours to prepare, to pray, to write final letters, to make peace with her death. The woman who was once queen of 2 countries, danced at the French court and survived decades of political intrigue, now faces the executioner's block. The Great Hall at Fothering is being prepared. 300 witnesses are gathering. And Mary is choosing what to wear, writing her final words, deciding how she wants to be remembered. Because if she can no longer control how she lives, she can, at the very least, control how she dies. And what happens next? In that hall, the dignity, the drama. The devastating final moments will echo through history forever. Now we're witnessing the end of Mary, Queen of Scots, a queen who gambled everything on the wrong cards and lost spectacularly. The night before her execution, Mary, Queen of Scots, isn't sleeping. How could she? She spends those final fleeting hours writing letters to the King of France, notes to her loyal servants, messages to anyone she thinks might still care. She meticulously plans her own burial. She prays, and she makes a very deliberate choice about her final outfit. Because Mary understands something crucial. Her execution isn't just an end, it's a performance. It's theater, and she is determined to control the narrative one last time. It's February 8th, 1587. Around 8 in the morning, Mary is led into the great hall at Fothering Castle. The air is cold. 300 people are packed in nobles, officials, local gentry, summoned to witness this grim, historic moment. In the center of the hall, a wooden platform, draped in black cloth, stands about 2 feet high. On it, a simple wooden block. Beside it, 2 executioners, their faces hidden behind black masks. This is it, the final scene. Mary enters, cloaked in black, just as everyone expects of a condemned prisoner. But then, in a move that will go down as one of the most brilliant pieces of symbolic theater in history, she allows her servants to help her remove the black outer garments. Underneath, she is ablaze in color. She's wearing a deep crimson-red dress and petticoat, blood red, the liturgical color of Catholic martyrdom. Message is electrifying and immediate. She is not dying as a criminal. She is dying as a martyr for her faith. She's sending a deliberate, powerful message to all of Catholic Europe. I am being murdered for my religion, not for any crime. Remember me as a victim of Protestant persecution. The officials read the death warrant aloud. Mary listens, her composure unshakable. When they finish, they ask if she has any last words. Oh, she does. She proclaims her innocence not necessarily of the plot, but of any genuine desire to harm England. She declares she dies for her Catholic faith and forgives her enemies, including her cousin, Queen Elizabeth. That forgiveness, you have to imagine, probably stings more than any curse she could have uttered. She then asks her servants to pray with her in Latin. The Protestant officials try to stop her, but Mary insists. These are her final moments, and she will pray how she chooses. Her servants are weeping openly. These are the people who have been by her side through 19 long years of captivity, and now they must watch her die. But Mary remains composed. She has to. This is her final act of queenship, to show dignity in the face of annihilation.
Ow.
She even forgives the executioner for what he is about to do and asks him to be quick. Her ladies help her to the block. And this is where the sanitized version of history gives way to a gruesome reality. Mary kneels and places her head on the block. The executioner raises his axe, and he misses. He doesn't miss completely, but his first blow strikes the back of her head, not her neck. Miraculously, Mary doesn't cry out. The second blow is better, but still doesn't sever the head. It takes a third hacking blow, and even then, the executioner has to use the axe like a saw to finish the horrific task. Imagine being in that room. The witnesses who came expecting a swift, clean execution are horrified. This wasn't supposed to be a botched, bloody nightmare. Finally, the executioner lifts Mary's head by the hair to show the crowd, as was the custom. But in a final bizarre twist, Mary had been wearing an auburn wig. Her head slips from his grasp and thuds onto the platform while he's left holding the wig. Her real hair, revealed for all to see, was gray and cropped short, a testament to her long years in prison. And then a detail that breaks my heart every time. A small dog, a Skye Terrier, emerges from beneath Mary's blood-soaked skirts. It had been hiding there the entire time. The little dog refuses to leave her body, whimpering and lying in the pool of blood. The guards have to physically carry it away. It reportedly died a few days later, some say from grief, refusing to eat. Even in death, Mary had one companion who remained loyal to the very end. The hall is silent, save for the sounds of weeping. The officials are visibly shaken. This didn't feel like a triumph of justice. It felt like something much, much darker. Elizabeth had given strict orders. Mary's body was to be taken away and buried quickly, quietly, with no ceremony that could turn her grave into a shrine for Catholic pilgrims. They even burn her blood-stained clothes and the block itself to prevent them from becoming holy relics. Every single detail is calculated to erase Mary, to minimize her martyrdom. But you can't control a story once it's been told. News traveled slowly in 1587, but it traveled. Within weeks, all of Europe knows. And the reaction is exactly what Elizabeth feared. English Protestants celebrate. The Catholic threat is gone. But across Catholic Europe, there is outrage. Mary becomes the martyr she designed herself to be. Artists paint her, poets write about her tragic end, and the Pope unofficially declares her a saint. She becomes a powerful symbol of Catholic persecution under a Protestant regime. And what about Elizabeth? When her counselors finally break the news, she is reportedly furious. Historians still debate whether this rage was genuine or just more political theater. She claims she never meant for the execution warrant to be carried out, that her counselors betrayed her. She has William Davison, the secretary who delivered the warrant, arrested and thrown in the Tower of London. She claims he acted without her authority, which was technically true, but also incredibly convenient. Was her anger real? Maybe. She had agonized over this decision for years. Maybe she was furious that they took the choice out of her hands, making her look weak. Or, and this is the more cynical view, maybe Elizabeth knew exactly what her counselors were doing. Maybe she tacitly approved, then threw them under the bus to maintain her own image. I didn't want to kill my cousin. My advisors forced my hand. I'm a victim here too. The truth is likely somewhere in between. It was messy, human, and politically brilliant. But, regardless of Elizabeth's feelings, Mary is dead. The woman who once claimed the crowns of Scotland, France, and England dies with none. The woman who married 3 times for love and politics is destroyed by both. The woman who spent 19 years in captivity dies on a scaffold at 44 years old. Her own son James doesn't mourn her. He's too busy securing his future as Elizabeth's heir. And yet somehow Mary wins the legacy battle. Because over 400 years later, we are still talking about her. We debate her guilt, her choices, her marriages, her mistakes. Her story, culminating in that final, bloody, defiant performance, has captivated us for centuries. She may have lost her head, but she never lost control of her own legend. For centuries, we've been obsessed with the story of Elizabeth I and Mary, Queen of Scots. Books, films, plays, operas, their rivalry is a timeless tragedy that still grips us. Elizabeth lived for another 16 years after Mary's execution. She defeated the Spanish Armada, solidified Protestant England, and became one of the most successful monarchs in English history. But when we think of them, we don't just remember Elizabeth's victories. We remember the 2 queens who never met, yet whose lives were forever intertwined. And it leads to a haunting question. Did Elizabeth make the right choice? From a purely political survival of the fittest standpoint? Absolutely. Keeping Mary alive was a constant ticking time bomb. Every day Mary breathed was another day Elizabeth's enemies had a living, breathing symbol to rally around. Her death effectively neutralized the most serious Catholic threats to Elizabeth's crown. The Spanish Armada sailed just a year later, but without Mary as a potential replacement queen, the invasion lost a crucial piece of its legitimacy. Elizabeth survived, she thrived, and England became the Protestant power that would shape world history. But what about the human cost? In that sense, Elizabeth lost too. She lost any possibility of reconciliation with the only other woman in the world who truly understood the crushing weight of a crown in that era. She lost the chance to meet her cousin face to face. She set a dangerous precedent that an anointed monarch could be tried and executed. This would come back to haunt the English monarchy less than a century later when Charles I was beheaded, partly because Mary's execution had already broken that sacred seal. Elizabeth had to live with the knowledge that she signed her own family member's death warrant. Whether that truly troubled her conscience or was just a political inconvenience, we'll never really know. Now let's be clear, Mary made terrible choices. She trusted the wrong men, made disastrous marriages, and completely failed to grasp the brutal nature of 16th century politics. But she tried to be both a queen and a woman, powerful and loving, strategic and authentic. And for that, the world of her time punished her mercilessly. Elizabeth, on the other hand, made ruthless choices. She sacrificed personal happiness, family ties, and romantic love, all for the sake of power and survival. Her reward? A long, glorious reign and a legendary place in history. But she died alone, unmarried, childless, having never known the kind of intimacy and connection Mary seemed to crave. 2 women, 2 starkly different strategies for surviving impossible circumstances. One died young on a scaffold, The other died old in a palace. Both paid a price we can barely imagine. Their legacy captivates us because it forces us to ask questions we still wrestle with today. How much should you sacrifice for power? When is survival worth the cost of your own humanity? Can women be both strong and soft, or must they always choose? Is it better to live authentically and die young, or live strategically and die powerful but alone? There are no easy answers. But what happened after Mary's death, how England reacted, how Spain responded, how Elizabeth's final years unfolded, and the ultimate irony of who inherited her throne. That's where this story delivers its final devastating twist. Because while Mary lost every battle in her lifetime, in the end, her bloodline won the war. And that tells us everything about the true price both women paid. Here's the twist that makes this whole tragic saga almost darkly funny. Mary's son, James, the baby boy she last saw when he was less than a year old. The son, who grew up calling his own mother a murderer and refused to lift a finger to save her, he becomes King of England. Not just Scotland, but England too. The very throne Elizabeth spent her entire life protecting, the crown Mary died trying to claim, ends up on the head of Mary's direct heir. Let's fast forward. It's March 24th, 1603. Elizabeth I dies at Richmond Palace. She's 69 years old and has ruled England for an incredible 45 years, longer than the average lifespan at the time. She never married, never had children, and true to her word, died the Virgin Queen. With no direct heir, the crown must pass to the nearest legitimate relative with royal blood. And who is that? James VI of Scotland, Mary's son, who now becomes James I of England. Just think about that for a second. Elizabeth executed Mary to protect her throne from Mary's claim. She held Mary prisoner for 19 years because she was a threat to the succession. She remained unmarried and childless to maintain absolute power. And then the throne goes to Mary's son anyway. All the strategic maneuvering, all the personal sacrifice, all the political bloodshed to prevent Mary's line from inheriting England. It ultimately meant nothing. History, it seems, had a different plan. And here says the even wilder part. Every single British monarch since 1603 has been a direct descendant of Mary, Queen of Scots, not Elizabeth. Queen Victoria, a descendant of Mary. Queen Elizabeth II, a descendant of Mary. King Charles III today, descendant of Mary. The current British royal family traces its entire lineage back through Mary Stuart. Elizabeth's bloodline ended with her. Mary's continues to this day, sitting on the very throne of the United Kingdom. So who really won? It's more complicated than it seems. Elizabeth undeniably won the battle. She lived longer, ruled more successfully, and went down in history as one of England's greatest monarchs. But Mary won the dynasty. Elizabeth got power and glory in her lifetime. Mary got a legacy that has lasted for centuries. It's as if the universe presented them with a choice. You can have power, or you can have family, but you can't have both. Elizabeth chose power. Mary, for all her catastrophic mistakes, chose love and family. And in the long, winding course of history, Mary's choice outlasted Elizabeth's. But let's rewind to the immediate aftermath of Mary's execution in 1587, because the consequences were huge and immediate. King Philip II of Spain had been itching for an excuse to invade England for years. He loathed Elizabeth's Protestantism and England's support for Dutch rebels fighting against Spanish rule. He saw England as a heretic nation that needed to be brought back to the Catholic fold by force. Mary's execution was the perfect justification he'd been waiting for. In 1588, just 1 year after Mary's death, Spain launched the Spanish Armada. This was the largest invasion fleet Europe had ever seen, 130 ships carrying 30,000 men. With a single goal, to invade England, overthrow Elizabeth, and install a Catholic monarch. This was the exact nightmare scenario that had made Elizabeth hesitate for so long. By killing a Catholic queen, she had given Catholic Europe a martyr and a righteous cause for war. But this is where Elizabeth's decades of careful, strategic statecraft paid off brilliantly. England defeated the Spanish Armada. It was a stunning victory achieved through a combination of superior naval tactics, a healthy dose of good luck in the form of a storm that scattered the Spanish ships, and Elizabeth's long-term investment in building up England's navy. It remains one of the greatest military victories in English history. For Elizabeth's supporters, It was seen as divine proof of God's favor. The Protestant queen had defeated the mighty Catholic Empire. Had Mary still been alive, the Armada might have had a clearer purpose, a stronger claim to legitimacy. The invasion would have been framed as a mission to place the rightful queen on the throne. But with Mary gone, the invasion was simply a foreign conquest, and it ultimately failed. Elizabeth's gamble had paid off, securing her throne and her legacy for the remainder of her life. Yet, as we've seen, history's final judgment is often written not in battles won, but in bloodlines that endure. In a strange way, Mary's death, as tragic and brutal as it was, might have saved England from Spanish conquest. If Elizabeth had kept delaying, kept Mary alive through 1588, the Armada might have succeeded. The timing, horrible as it was for Mary, worked out for England. Sometimes history is just brutally pragmatic like that. Elizabeth lived another 16 years after the Armada, growing older, more isolated, but also more legendary. She never stopped working, never stopped performing the role of queen, but she was alone. Robert Dudley, the love of her life, died in 1588. Most of her closest advisors died before she did. She outlived almost everyone from her youth. In her final years, there are reports that she was melancholic, struggling with the loneliness of her choices. She got everything she wanted: power, respect, a successful reign. But at the cost of everything else? When asked about her successor in her final days, she reportedly said, "Who should succeed me but a king?" When pressed for a name, she finally replied, "I will let a king succeed me, and who but my kinsman, the King of Scotland." She was talking about James, Mary's son. Must have been complicated for Elizabeth, knowing that the son of the woman she executed would inherit everything she'd spent her life building. But she was pragmatic to the end. James was the logical choice. Legitimate blood, already a king, and Protestant despite his mother's Catholicism. England and Scotland would finally be united under one crown. So what are we supposed to take from this story? What's the lesson from these two women who never met but defined each other's lives? I don't think there's one simple answer, but here's what strikes me. Elizabeth and Mary represent two different approaches to an impossible situation. They were both women trying to rule in a world that didn't believe women should rule. They both faced constant pressure, threats, plots, and the fundamental challenge of being taken seriously. But they responded in completely opposite ways. Elizabeth built walls. She protected herself through isolation, strategy, and the refusal to show vulnerability. She became untouchable by becoming unavailably, romantically, dynastically. She played the game better than anyone, but the game required her to give up parts of her humanity. She died powerful, but alone. Mary tried to stay open. She loved, trusted, married, hoped. She believed in the possibility of having both power and intimacy, both authority and authenticity, and the world punished her for it. Every time she showed vulnerability, it was used against her. Every time she trusted someone, they betrayed her or failed her. She died young and broken, but she'd at least tried to live fully. Neither approach was wrong. They were just different solutions to the same impossible problem. And here's what I find most moving about their story. They both paid terrible prices for their choices. Elizabeth gave up love and family. Mary gave up her freedom and eventually her life. There was no winning strategy, just different ways of losing. But their legacies tell us something important. We remember both of them. We're still fascinated by both of them. Elizabeth gets respect for her political genius and her successful reign. Mary gets sympathy for her tragic life and her attempt to be fully human while fully powerful. They represent two sides of an eternal question. Should you prioritize survival or authenticity? Strategy or emotion? Head or heart? Maybe the answer is that we need both. Maybe we need the Elizabeths of the world, strategic, careful thinking 10 steps ahead. But we also need the Marys, passionate, hopeful, willing to risk everything for connection. The tragedy is when the world forces you to choose one completely at the expense of the other. Look at their story from a modern perspective. How many of you have felt the pressure to choose between career success and personal relationships? Between protecting yourself emotionally and being vulnerable enough to connect? Between playing it safe and taking risks that might lead to either great joy or great pain? Elizabeth and Mary's story is 450 years old, but these questions are timeless. What would have happened if they'd actually met? If they'd sat down? Face to face? without ambassadors and political posturing, and just talked as cousins, as women, as queens, dealing with impossible circumstances? Could they have found common ground? Could they have helped each other instead of destroying each other? We'll never know. But the fact that they never met feels like the saddest part of the whole story. Two women who might have been allies, who might have understood each other better than anyone else, were kept apart by politics, fear, and the brutal logic of power. In the end, their rivalry wasn't really about who was the better queen. It was about two different philosophies of survival colliding in a world that had no space for either of them to succeed on their own terms. They were both remarkable women. They both deserved to be remembered. And they both paid prices that no one should have to pay for the simple act of existing as powerful women in a world run by men. Wow. So here we are, over 400 years later, still talking about Elizabeth and Mary, still debating their choices, still trying to understand how two baby girls born into royal families ended up, locked in a rivalry that would kill one and haunt the other. This story reminds us that history is made by real people with real emotions, making impossible choices under terrible pressure. It reminds us that there are no easy answers when you're retrying to survive in a world that fundamentally doesn't want you to succeed. And it reminds us that legacy is strange and unpredictable. Elizabeth got the glory, Mary got the martyrdom. But Mary's blood flows through every British monarch since her son united England and Scotland. Her story became legend. She lost everything in life but one, something in death. She became unforgettable. And maybe that's its own kind of victory. Thank you so much for staying with me through this incredible, tragic, and fascinating story. I know it's been a long journey, traveling through the lives of two remarkable queens. I hope you found it as compelling as I do. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if you're sitting there now wondering about your own choices between safety and authenticity, between strategy and heart, please let me know in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into history, there are so many more stories waiting to be told. Stories of power and betrayal, love and loss, impossible choices, and unexpected consequences. History is full of these human dramas that echo across centuries. So subscribe if you haven't already, because there's always another story waiting for us to explore together. Until next time, take care, and remember, we're all just trying to survive impossible circumstances the best way we know how. Sometimes we make the right choices, sometimes we don't. But our stories matter. Our struggles matter. Understanding the past helps us navigate the present. I'll see you in the next story.